Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
You talk to anybody in Hollywood, they would tell you that Jim Hecht is responsible for bringing us Winning Time. That's a show on HBO right now about the Los Angeles Lakers. It's an incredible show. And most importantly, though, more importantly than that, Jim is 20 years sober. And for people like him that have achieved success in sobriety, and he talks about illustrating his ups and downs in sobriety. As we say, it's not all unicorns and rainbows. But for somebody like him that has achieved success like this, to share a story with us about his sobriety, and how he was brought to his knees makes this whole thing so relatable and inspiring. His wife, Courtney Friel, news anchor on KTLA right now out in California, Philly girl, formerly of Fox News. She joined us about a year ago, if you might remember that. So this is our first husband and wife duo, and they are a winning team. I talked to Jim about this guy who's out in California, hitting meetings and playing music as well. Kevin Souza. So in my wheelhouse, it's out of control.
Oh, good.
I think your wife Courtney told you, who's sober, that she was on this podcast like about a year ago, and and you know, I'm talking to her. She's from Philly. She's in TV news. I'm in TV news, and then she tells me that her husband's sober and that he's working on the Lakers show. And I had to climb over her to get to you.
Well, that's a first. Usually it's the other way around.
Well, and I was going to give you a break. I wasn't going to give you like, now you got a podcast to come on. But then I heard you on Rosillo. I heard you with Jeff Pearlman, and you were out there with your sobriety, which I thought was super cool.
Oh, thank you. I mean, yeah, it's an important part of my story. It's actually an important part of the Showtime story because it got me too there.
You mentioned your story. It's not hard to find stuff about you as a screenwriter, back to the animated stuff, moving forward to Winning Time. What about before then? Where did you grow up? You were born. I saw you were born in New York, but you talk about being raised in California.
Yeah, I was born in Queens, and we moved when I was about 2. And my parents my dad ended up being a professor, and they were young, so they were in college. So every time they got a new degree or a new job, we moved a bunch of times. By the time I was 5 and ended up in LA, around there.
All right. So you grew up in California. When did you take, if you remember, when you took your first drink?
Well, I'm Jewish. My parents would take us to Passover. So I think my first probably drink was like the wine at the Passover Seders, which was probably like 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there. The first time I drank like for real was probably 11.
Okay, so that's pretty early. So what did that? What's that scenario look like?
Well, 80s. I think we were all a little bit more raised by wolves than kids are today, or even 10 years later. Just a lot of unsupervised time, and I think the first time I drank was like breaking into my dad's liquor cabinet or whatever and helping myself, and nothing happened. And like a night or two, maybe it was much of a week later, we ended up drinking around the pool in a hot tub in Southern Comfort, and like the last thing I remembered was this bottle kind of spinning around the hot tub empty. And I woke up in the bathtub. My dad had come and gotten me and carried me home. I puked all over the place and, talked about all sorts of things I probably did not want my father to know about, like times I played sick to miss school. And, I woke up and I heard him telling somebody about it on the phone. And I just, the shame.
Yeah, I was about to think of that as the word that hit me between the eyes. Like at that age, you're 11 years old, and the shame is already kind of being poured on.
Yeah, it was all like cemented right there. And, I'm never going to do that again. And I'm not sure how long that lasted, but it wasn't that long um, before I was, you know, doing it again. And people tell me, oh, it's hard alcohol. Hard alcohol has a kick. So I tried to watch out for that. So I was already like trying to control and enjoy my drinking from the age of 11.
Was there any like were your friends like kind of outlaws, or did you gravitate to that kind of crowd?
Yeah, yes. My friends, we were all little kids weren't, obviously outlaws became that around 11, 12, 13 years old. And so I sort of went with them. And I had sort of like always like two groups of friends. So it was like my friends were like the good kids who played sports. And there was my friends that, that sort of like to live a little bit darker like I did. And I just kind of bounced back and forth between the two groups. In high school, I'm more settled in the jock, kind of crowd, and didn't really get back until college. Then I started to drink again really hard.
What was it like? Like, were you drinking during the week in high school? And the question I have for you, what was it doing for you?
Not during high school, but like, like I said, during junior high, yes, we would steal our parents' weed, and I didn't even really like to smoke weed, but we did it. I think it just made me, it was a way that I could be cooler than the other kids. Like I had access, and I knew how to do it, and so I think it was like just a way to sort of be popular and have friends, and that's sort of what I think it did for me more than anything at that age. It wasn't at that age so much about escaping; it was more like just trying to be cool.
Yeah, that was a double-edged sword for me growing up. I grew up like I told you outside of Philly, and I played sports. I liked the way that alcohol made me feel, and I liked how it made me fit in. It kind of gave me, like you said, it gave me access to this popular crowd, and I was like, why wouldn't I continue to use this tool for the rest of my life?
Yeah, I mean that too. I guess it was, I recall like it was definitely, lowers your inhibition and allows you to be more outgoing and if you act like an idiot the next day, I was drunk. And so I guess it did do that for me as well.
When you got into high school and, you mentioned you're drinking once in a while on weekends, what's it like as you're getting ready to go to college, what kind of drugs are you doing?
Well, from an early age, I read books like Bright Lights, Big City and Less Than Zero when I was like 11 and 12.
I never read the book, but the Michael J. Fox movie. I loved it.
Yeah. I think they tried to steer away from showing him doing drugs in the movie, but in the book, it's the main character's coke addict. And those were kind of cautionary tales. They were like, don't do this. And I read them and I was like, that's the way that I want to live. That's the handbook for living right there. Especially Less Than Zero. Like these kids just didn't seem to feel anything. I felt everything. I was very sensitive, and these kids seemed to like have nothing would affect them. And I was like, that's the way I want to be. I don't want to feel anything. I don't know if it was because of my parents. My mom, for example, was a psychologist. My dad was a professor. So it was always like, how do you feel? Like it was always just like kind of an emotionally intrusive quality. And I just didn't want to feel anything. Like I'm fine. Just leave me alone. I'm okay. And so I looked at those kids and I was like, that's how I'd like to feel.
It's weird, dude. I have the same alcoholic brain you do, probably, right? And those movies, that the Doors, all that stuff was like super alluring. The drug culture, whether you got it gritty or whether you cleaned it up, like the Less Than Zero kids. Either way, I was all in. And at the time, I think my mom was like, dude, what's going on with this guy? Like, I'm finding pot in his room and he's watching the Doors nonstop and he's listening to the Grateful Dead. And he's like, I was a 17-year-old and it just kind of didn't make a ton of sense on the outside. But for me, it was a perfect storm.
Right. And, two things. First of all, like all of those books would end with like, and then I stopped doing cocaine and I walked away and never did it again. So the mythology is like, oh, if it gets too much to handle, I'll just stop. And, that it'll be that easy. I'll just walk away from it. And yeah, I mean, I had my parents were professors. They both had PhDs. My stepdad had a PhD, my stepmom, both of my stepsisters or whatever. And I was getting like D's and F's. I had like a 2.3 when I graduated from high school. Like, it just didn't make any sense.
Were they disappointed?
Yeah, I think so. It was kind of, especially my freshman year when I was really not a good kid. I was in the ones. I was really like flunking out and just didn't care. I don't know why. I just didn't care. I didn't want to do homework. I just wanted to hang out with my friends. I was this kid who a few years before was like, I'm going to go to Harvard. I'm going to be president of the United States. And it was just the only thing that mattered to me was my friends and getting drunk and getting high.
When you mentioned you've talked about your ADD, I've just heard you share about that. And were you medicated as a kid, and were you abusing those drugs, or did they help?
No, I mean, it was the 80s. We didn't have that.
Yeah.
It was just you were hyperactive, and it was sort of demonized, and we didn't get to be like, oh my God, if I could have like gotten, diagnosed, socially acceptable and gotten free speed, I would have been elated. Didn't know what that was. I think I'm slightly dyslexic too. I can't spell, to this day. I'm a writer, but I can't spell. Yes, it was very hard for me to sit down and focus and do homework. It felt like a hot stove if I really did not want to do it. And the first time I got good grades was when I sort of, was able to find cocaine in high school.
So you started to you start doing some coke in high school, and you notice it's kind of
like, I can study.
Yeah. We always run out though.
I like this. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. But yeah, it was like the first time I was like, wow, I like studying now.
Yeah.
And I think there's also this mythology of like, well, more so for writers. I don't know if I think I believed it then too, that like drugs and sort of intellectual work went together, so you could access the best parts of your mind or some shit like that. And
I was going to ask you that if you felt like the drugs made you more creative.
I wasn't really creative at that point in my life as a high school kid. I wasn't really thinking about, doing TV and movies or being a writer. I was going to go to law school if I could. But yeah, I thought it was like going to help me do homework and stuff, and it did.
So where'd you go to college? I think you went somewhere in DC. I've heard you say you were on the debate team.
No, I started at Arizona State.
Okay.
I was on the debate team there. You don't get a lot of, college choices when you're hovering around 50% of your high school class. And then when I got to college, all of a sudden I was a really good student. I had 4 O's. I was, partially in defiance of like I wanted to show my dad that he was the problem. As soon as I got out of the house, my grades were good, so it must be him. And partially because I got around, I was on the debate team at a big school where you could easily get lost. So that was like my people, and they were all really good students. So I wanted to be a really good student. And I learned how to study and did that. And then I went to USC for film school. And so I ended up actually becoming a really good student.
Was that enhanced at all by drugs, or were you literally on your own accord, just busting your ass, getting good grades?
At college, I was a drinker. I was a heavy drinker. And there was a lot of drinking and drugs in the debate culture, strangely enough. But I didn't have access to a lot of drugs. I experimented with things. I did acid for the first time. But it was mostly just I was drinking a lot.
When did you start to feel like, okay, this is an issue? Or did you for a while? I mean, for myself, I kind of knew, hey, I thought this stuff was magic because it was enabling me to do things I would lie to people. I would say, I made out with that girl, and then I would drink and I would have the courage to talk to that girl. And that was a big thing for me. But I knew it was a problem.
In college, I think because you didn't always have to wake up the next morning, like it wasn't a problem. Like I could drink all night and then one time I got really drunk and I woke up the next day and this was during a debate tournament. I had like the best turn them into my life. And so I was like, oh, this works for that too. You wake up and you don't like really care, and you're still a little bit drunk, and that helps in some ways. It wasn't until I got out of college and tried to work, and then, oversleeping things that I have to be at and really want to be at. I'm going out for a couple of drinks with people that I work with and drastically overshooting the mark, and then have to live with that shame around, coworkers.
What did you do out of college?
Well, I was, like I said, I was going to go to law school in the summer before my senior year. I interned at Nickelodeon in Orlando, and I was like, this is way better. I want to do this. And so right after college, I went to Orlando and started working at Nickelodeon, and did that. I worked there, MTV, VH1, Universal, for 2 or 3 years, and then kind of was like, I don't really know anything. So that's when I decided to go to grad school. I went to film school. I came back, went to film school at USC, and took it from there.
It's funny. I got a friend. I saw your credit, your name as a credit for the show Taina, and a girl that I anchored with down here.
Yeah.
I'm in Texas. A girl that I anchored with down here thanks you because people know how to say that name. Her name's Taina, and nobody gets that. Yeah, nobody gets that shit right.
Yeah, I think that was right after graduate school. So after that, I went back again into the Nickelodeon world, and I worked on Taina. I worked on, before that, I'd worked on like All That and Keenan and Kel and Guts and all those great sort of 90s kids staples, Eddie McDowd, and the award shows, the Kids Help and Kids Choice and Big Help and things like that.
Now, is your ego getting big as you have this success? Or are you partying a lot? Because this is pretty good for a young guy.
Yeah, I mean, yes. When I was, 22, 23 years old, I'm writing stuff that's on TV. Even, it's just kid stuff. Yeah, my ego was pretty big. And then when I went back to graduate school, 24, 25, I was like, I was the only person who'd actually like done stuff, written professionally. And so I thought a lot of myself, I was probably insufferable. And that's in grad school is when I came back to LA and I started living in Hollywood. That's when I really started getting into drugs. Then I had ready access to cocaine, and from there it just took off.
As a writer,
I ended up getting sober.
As a writer, was any of your writing, and now you're creative, was any of it fueled by drugs? Because early on,
no,
none of it. So you're sober when you're writing.
Yeah, sometimes I would drink and write, and then later when you're doing coke, you're working high. But like then it was like I would stare at one page and work on that one page all night.
Yeah,
I couldn't really focus or do anything. Like it didn't. It was not. I know a lot of people are like, oh, they had these big careers on drugs, but that was not my story. I couldn't be a professional on drugs, and when I was doing drugs and drinking, like I couldn't show up. No, I was really bad at my job, and then all the things that go along with alcoholism, like the grandiosity and the sort of king baby behavior made me like a really not a good person to have around, on your staff, and I was like completely repugnant as a professional before I got sober, both in the quality of my work probably and in the way the quality of the person that I was to have on a team.
Well, clearly you're very good at your job though, because you kept working, and we're about to get to like when you bottom out, because I'm curious about that. But I want to ask you what were your relationships like with females? Mine were a disaster. I mean, I took hostages, and it was just a nightmare. But what was your experience with that?
Same. I mean, I had a bunch of like 3-year relationships in a row until I got sober, and they were, caustic. They were inflammatory. They were, a lot of crazy fighting and bad behavior, and then you get back together, and I don't know that I ever dated anybody that drank as much as me, but I definitely dated people that were, that partied. And some great people, that some of them I'm still friends with, and I just couldn't do anything like functional. And so that was part of it. Not good in relationships.
When did you start?
Always in one, but
Yeah.
but not fun to be in one way.
When did you start to realize that this was something that you had to stop? Were you the type of person that just completely crashed and bottomed out, or did you think, okay, I'm going to stop in October, and it's September 15th?
Yeah, there were stop signs along the way, and I think anybody that's gotten involved with cocaine will attest that brings you to your knees faster, which I'm grateful for, because maybe I could have drank for another 10, 20 years if I just did that. I wouldn't have had such low lows, such people talk about pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. Those mornings of just waking up and hating myself, I think, were a lot lower because of the drug use. And so, yeah, it was like, okay, I need to stop doing this. And then, started to check out some of the 12-step programs. And
so did you start to kind of check in on that, like the 12-step life, but you didn't stop right away?
Yeah, right around, I guess, the turn of the century, around 2099, around there, I started, checking out 12-step programs. The idea of abstinence did not really appeal to me, but neither did the programs. I thought they were silly, and so I'd stay sober for 20, 30, 60 days or whatever, and then go back. And meanwhile, like, the things that people are talking about in those communities are I'm living them now. So the always worse, never better, the periods of brief recovery followed by even worse relapse. The things that these stories I would hear. I'm walking down that road, and it all just seems inevitable, and I'm fitting it to a T. So fortunately, I was around them enough to hear the things, and now I'm seeing that. I'm seeing the pattern because I know about it, and that just sort of, I did that for about a year and a half, where things just got worse and worse, and then finally, it just hit me. I was like in a closet in Las Vegas and up all night and crying and a real moment of clarity. Like, it was just like, oh my God, I'm not a horrible person. I'm an alcoholic, and I am horrible when I drink. And that was like the world sort of slowed with that realization. And then the next thought was like, well, now that I get it, I have a responsibility to not drink, because I understand what that does.
And so what do you do? What's your first action? This is a program of action, we say. What's the first action you take? You're in Vegas, you're in a closet, you're broken down.
Yeah. I called my therapist at like 6:00 in the morning on a Sunday. And I remember her reading a passage from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous to me. That was the surrender. And then I went to rehab. I went to this place on the west side of LA. And that was also surrender. That was like, okay, I'm going to go away for 30 days. Everybody's going to know about it, which I was really worried about.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what are people going to think? And no phone, no cell phone, no car. You're not leaving. You're going to do what we say. You're going to go to groups at 7 in the morning or whatever. And I fought and resisted some of the rules, but I ultimately dove into it.
It's funny. I was reading. My buddy gave me a pair of new glasses, and he gave it to me in 2019. I'm finally starting to get into it now. And the thing that it says early in the book, Chuck C, 12-step guy, is sober for a very long time, talks about, I'd lost everything but my ego. And like when you break down, and I remember going to rehab. That was my story too. And I remember showing up and telling the woman, "Hey, I know we're only allowed to go to the gym 3 days a week, but if I'm going to be sober, it's important that I go 5." And she was like, no, dude, you're going with everybody else." That was my first realization, Jim. I was like, oh boy, like this is the real deal, because people had told me, "Hey, you're going to be able to do whatever you want." People told me anything as long as I would say, "Okay, I'll do it."
Right.
But that's the part of surrendering, like you said.
Yeah, and I every day I get to this place where I was like, if I leave tonight, I'm going to be drunk by midnight. You know what I mean? Like, I had that realization over and over again. Like, I'm not going to click. And then I was able to go see that therapist, and she was the one that said, you need to pray. You need to
Was she a
Great
12-step person too?
question.
Did she have experience with that, or did she just know
Yeah,
what your
she
deal
did.
was? Okay.
No, she had long-term sobriety, 10 years, 11 years or something. And I did. I tried it. And she said, I argued with her. I did the whole thing about the wave and the ocean. You know, I was like, well, I think the wave is kind of screwed because the wave can't get out of the ocean and the wave can't go to the movies. The wave can't make a place. She's like, all right, just accept that everything I say is bullshit and then do it anyway. And for some reason that made sense to me. So I did. And that worked. The obsession was lifted, and you know, I've been very vigilant to make sure that it doesn't come back. I don't know if I just got lucky, beginner's luck or whatever, but it really worked for me. And I never want to be under that obsession again.
What did you do when you got out of treatment? Like, what was your move? Did you do like a lot of meetings or?
Yeah, fortunately, nobody would hire me. I was unemployed for the first 6 months. And I went to 12-step meetings, you know, 2, 3 a day, and made it my life. And then, you know, in my story, I went super, you know, I went broke. I didn't have any money. I was overdrawn. My checking account, like I had a change dish, but I had used all the quarters and the dimes and the nickels, and all I had was like $2.57 in pennies. And I was looking at the dog going, you know, one of us isn't going to eat today, buddy. And it might be you. And I went to the beach. I used to I started getting up early. I took my dog to the beach, 6 o'clock in the morning, played fetch with him. And I hit my knees on the beach and I prayed. I know we're not supposed to pray. You know, they tell you don't pray for results or specific things, but I was like, God, just let me get in the game. You know, just give me a chance to demonstrate, you know, to get it, you know, to try to make my dreams come true. Just give me an opportunity. And I had this thought, you know, not literally the voice of God, but like this sort of small, still voice inside me said, baseball cards. And baseball cards meant something to me because I had every baseball card from like 1976 to 1990.
Yeah. And
it was like the one thing I was never going to sell because, you know, my dad went to college and his parents sold his and they would have been worth $1 million.
You always hear those horror stories, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they threw away the original Mickey Mantle or whatever. And so I was like, that's it. I'll sell my baseball cards. The one thing I would never sell and demonstrate my willingness to the universe to make dreams come true, blah, blah, blah. And I went into the garage and I started getting the cards out to organize them, to take them down, to sell them. And at the bottom of this box of baseball cards was an envelope and wedged in between 2 sets. And I took it out and it was a tax return, a check from 1996 that I had never opened, remember getting. And it was like $360 or something like that. And then I had gotten a sober job, and that check, I deposited the check and it stayed in my account till the day after I got my first sober paycheck. And then the bank kicked it out for being more than 90 days old. So it literally just lasted me, that bridged from like, you were completely out of money to you're going to get a check. And I remember I ran down and found my 12-step sponsor at a meeting, and I told him that, and he said, well, kid, you know, sometimes coincidence is God's way of staying anonymous. And he didn't make that up, but I thought it was some real Yoda-ish advice, and it just kind of...
Wait, what did he say again? I lost for a sec. What did he say?
He said, coincidence is God's way of staying anonymous.
Huh.
And I've had, you know, moments like that on several occasions in my sobriety, and then still, when things aren't going my way, I go, there's no God. I don't believe in that stuff. Things don't work out for me. If there is a God, he hates me. You know, I just go right back to that sort of thinking. Even though time and time again, the universe has caught me and I've been, you know, I've had these sort of miraculous moments.
We'll get back to this conversation in a second, but right now, a word from our sponsors. Yeah, I mean, it sounds miraculous. That story is unbelievable, and I appreciate you so much sharing that. You obviously, you know, you get sober, but you go back into working. You mentioned 6 months later. How do you reintegrate? Because writing is hard. You know, like anybody you talk to that's a writer will say, writing seems to keep you humble. You know, it just does.
Yeah.
And how did you start doing that
all
again?
I did for the next 3, 4, 5 years was work. I was just determined that I was going to make it. And so for 2 of those years, I was really struggling. And it was like my dad at one point said, do you think maybe it's time to try to find something else to do? And, I got to another place of being broke, being behind on rent, living on unemployment. And
which happens in sobriety. Like, it's not all unicorns and rainbows, like you go through your shit.
2.5 years. Yeah. This was at least 2.5 years sober. And I was super depressed because I had been promised a job on this Nickelodeon show called Zoe 101, starring Jamie Lynn Spears, Brittany's little sister.
Yeah.
And at the last minute, I didn't get the job. And so I was, as down as I'd ever been. And I did get a job. I got a job doing a pilot at Spike TV. I think it paid $2,500 for a 30-minute pilot, which is not a lot. But I was just like, I'm going to kill this thing, and I'm going to, prove, that I can do it. And I got really lucky. The pilot, John Leguizamo, ended up doing the pilot, and then we clicked. And then he was doing this animated movie at Fox where he played as Sloth, and I was like, hey, would you come in and work on my character? And once I got in, that was the Ice Age movies. And then when I got in on that, I was like, you'll never get rid of me. I will never leave. And I just worked round the clock. So from that took me to year 5, or no, I think year 4 was the end of Ice Age 2. And at that point I had done nothing but work for the first 4 years of sobriety. And that last year, the year that I was on Ice Age 2, I didn't date for a year.
Just because you were obsessed with, work was going so well, you almost didn't want to mess with it. Because Ice Age, it clearly takes off.
Right. There I am. I'm in the, I'm 31, 32. I'm writing a $100 million movie, which was my dream. And so all I did was work. But that was in White Plains, New York. I moved to White Plains, and for a minute I didn't go to meetings because I'm too busy.
Yeah.
And I started to lose my mind, and I became cognizant of the fact I was going to blow this chance. And so as much as I didn't want to do it, I found a new 12-step community in White Plains and got really active in that. And that got me through.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Like when you can move somewhere, like I've moved around a little in sobriety, and you can break through and get that new group going. That's like that muscle memory where it's like, okay, I have smart feet now. I can go to this group in White Plains. I know people. And sometimes it's hard to break through. It's again, like a program of action. You got to get your ass there. And then when you do, you become reconnected and you're moving further away from a drink again and not closer to one.
Exactly. And those people kept me grounded and humble, which was important.
So your career,
and then I kind of burned out.
Okay, go ahead. So I
was like, oh God. God, I didn't want to work that hard anymore. And then I started just, then I had a career in talking animal movies, and people were like, okay, you're just going to write family movies. And I sort of had, several years where all I did was take the highest paying job I could find or the most prestigious. And I just kind of ruined myself as an asset. Nothing was getting made. I was ruining my career. And
how so? You were just becoming like typecast as a writer?
Well, the longer you go with things not getting made, and you're writing these screenplays, and they're like, you don't go to that person to write a screenplay if you know that everything that they write doesn't get made.
Okay.
Right. So you become less and less valuable as a writer the longer that goes along. And that's what I was doing to myself. And I hit sort of an emotional bottom around 2013. I was in a relationship with somebody who was in a relationship for 3 years. And she moved to Texas, so she might be one of your listeners nowadays.
Okay.
And so I bottomed out on that, and so personally and professionally, I was really, really depressed. And a friend of mine in the program, a 12-step program, took me to. Was like, he was British. He's like, Jim, follow me, do what I'm doing. And so I really got into meditation through him because I was so down, and I was willing to try anything. And early on in meditation, I had this kind of realization that it was twofold. It was like, one, you need to stop doing stuff that you like and only do stuff that you love. Because when I like something, that I'm writing it's really hard. Like it's anxiety provoking. It's depression riddled. I feel horrible about it. I hate doing it. I don't do a good job. I don't think I'm very good at it. And it's a little bit torturous. But if you love something, at least for me, then it is just enough fuel to get you through all the hard stuff that you're going to go through when you're writing something. And the second thought was, you got to stop trying to do things that you think other people would want to see and write the thing that you would want to watch. And literally the next day I was listening to sports radio out here because I'm that kind of fan. I was listening to ESPN radio, Max Kellerman and Marcellus Wiley. And they had Jeff Pearlman on, and he was talking about his new book that was coming out, Showtime. And so I went to Book Soup, 9:00 in the morning when the book came out. I think the next day, I was there when the doors opened. I bought Jeff's book. I read it by like 11 or 12. And I called my agent and I was like, I want to do this as a series. And he said, Jim, this is the thing that's going to be written on your gravestone. And that was 2014.
And so how do you get this thing going? I mean, because here you are, you're an animation guy or talking, whatever, right. Animal guy. And then so
talking
now
animals, yeah.
You're going to do something that's honestly never been done before. I mean, it's so hard, I would imagine, to get, and something that a lot of people want to see, but it's just like the logistics. It breaks my brain to think about how you would make a show with the detail that Winning Time has.
You're crazy.
Yeah.
Because they're like, you're never going to get permission from the league. No network will touch this because of the league. And it's never been done before. Is it a mini series? What is it? And I was seeing like Friday Night Lights with the Lakers in the 80s. And I flew across country. I got a meeting with Jeff Pearlman.
Who was awesome. Everything he has is I just love the guy. His books are unbelievable. If I don't read them, I listen to him. And he's got that sports junkie that's so authentic. His work, he does hard work. I mean, the interviews he does that go into these books that he makes, dude, it's like he's talking like he's just walking up to J.R. Ryder's house and knocking on his door.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, that's a good way to get killed. You would think.
He overflowed Spencer Haywood's toilet.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff is an amazing writer, and his book read like a TV treatment because it would introduce the characters and go back and sort of explain who they were, where they came from. And he's an amazing writer, and also the kind of person that like makes me feel like a better person because he considers me a friend.
Yeah.
Like he's just that good of a dude. Fortunately, he had several things optioned by then, and nothing had ever happened with them. And so he wasn't going to come down to New York. He made me go up to New Rochelle. I went up to New Rochelle on Easter Sunday. I brought him, a block of Baker's chocolate, a bottle of non-alcoholic wine, because neither of us drank, and a tomato. I brought a tomato, and I told him what I wanted to do. And because nothing had ever worked out with his books being optioned before, he was kind of like, yeah, whatever. Take your shot. and he said when the door closed behind me, him and his wife turned to each other. They're like, nothing's ever going to come out of that. And then it bounced around a lot. I had producers attached. I had a lot of no's. I like to say nobody thought this was a great idea until Kevin Messick and Adam McKay thought this was a great idea.
Yeah.
And everybody thought it was a great idea. And I think it was 2 years of it bouncing around that way. Then Adam came out with The Big Short, and I was like, I want that. That's the way I want to do it. And I had known Kevin from an animated project that we worked on, and he took the meeting. God bless him.
Yeah.
And got them to do the book. But that's been an 8-year process from, Sunday. Tomorrow's the finale of season 1.
Yeah.
It was April of 2014 when I read the book.
And you guys got renewed too. I mean, so there'll be more.
Yeah. Yeah, we're doing that right now, and we're gearing up to start again. I've been in that writer's room for 3 years straight.
I know. I want to ask you about a writer's room. I have no idea what that's like. But writing alone is hard enough, I would imagine. What's it like as a sober guy to walk into a writer's room? That's a brand new experience, right? And like it's almost like I would imagine you might lean on your experience walking into an AA meeting that you don't want to go to or you've never been to before. I mean, what is that like, and how do you move through that experience?
Yeah, that would have been a smart way to look at it. I just didn't. I had never been in a writer's room before, and it was really hard for me. I'd never worked with other people. And I worked primarily with primarily with 3 or 4 other writers. But 2 who have a lot of experience. The showrunner, Max Borenstein,
Yeah.
my co-creator, and this guy, Rodney Barnes, who is just kind of a freak because he's hilarious. He's like Chris Rock's main writer, but also he's like got these incredible drama chops and understands character on a perspective I hadn't really been around before.
He plays the guard at the Forum, right?
He does, Maurice. Yeah.
Okay.
He's
yeah.
the security guard. So that's like being like, in sports terms, that's like being a power lifter who can deadlift 1,000 pounds, but also can win the Olympic 100 meters.
Yeah.
It's just a combination you don't see a lot. The drama and comedy chops coming together in that kind of way. And Max is just brilliant on the machine. So it was very intimidating for me. And it was a lot of like, the first year of it just felt horrible. It was really hard. Every day I just felt terrible.
Just because why? Because that's how we are? Or just were you doing good work and you were just crushing yourself?
I don't know. Part of it was the unfamiliarity of it. Part of it was, I thought making the shift from family movies to drama, I didn't realize how hard it was going to be. I'd never been in a writer's room, and that's a skill unto itself that I didn't have. And I was sort of like thrown in with Michael Jordan and LeBron James.
Yeah.
And didn't feel up to it. And God bless them. They stayed with me and they educated me. And then at some point it was like, oh yeah, I could do this. Did you
lean on people like in meetings and stuff and in sobriety to kind of get you through all this stuff? Because, it seems like an inspired move. Your fact that you make the jump, you go to Jeff's house, you pitch the show,
mm-hmm.
It's like, you look at what your resume is so far and it's like, where did this guy get the balls? But it's not the balls really. It's just, you were on fire, I guess, in one way or the other. Like you mentioned, the spawn was that meditation almost.
Yeah, I look back at it, and it didn't occur to me going through it, but looking back at it, I was like, wow, that was really audacious. Like, what made me think I could do that? My only credit, really, my biggest credit was Ice Age: The Meltdown. It doesn't really speak to someone being able to do an HBO prestige drama series. It just didn't occur to me. It didn't enter my mind that it couldn't be done or wouldn't be done. I don't know why. Never had that with anything else. It was like, this is going to happen. This is supposed to happen. This is, this is great. And I the only thing I can tell people when they're going through something like that or starting to try to do something like that is if you have an idea and you think it's a great idea, it's probably a great idea. And you should keep at it until you find the right people that also think it's a great idea.
It's clear that you're dialed in with recovery. That's why when I heard you talking to Ryan Russillo about Winning Time, I was like, damn, this guy's humble. He's cool. He obviously has he's connected. How much did you lean on?
Did I talk about recovery? I don't remember.
You mentioned, you guys talked about Jerry West, and you said that you'd had your struggles with depression and addiction. And for me, somebody who just knows what that sounds like, it was very clear you were comfortable in your own skin, and you didn't hit anybody over the head with it. But I was like, oh wow, this is cool. He's not ashamed of it. And I'm curious as to how how much did your 12-step work really play into this screenplay, because it's a deep show. I mean, it lets you know that these guys who you think, and women who have it all, are just like us. It's like, you hear like Superman rides the bus, dude. Like, it really makes you feel like these guys are just, and it makes you want to live in the present and understand, like, whatever you put out there and you think that's your carrot or your shiny diamond, like, you better just enjoy now and enjoy the process, because when you get there, you might be a nut like these guys.
Well, and that's the show, really. That's, to me, what Winning Time speaks to is this kind of ephemeral, not real thing that's out there someday that will fix me. If I can just get to it. And if you do get to it, it's like 5 minutes long, it's past, and then you need something bigger and better, right? So I had that experience, with the Ice Age movies. I remember I bought a car while I was working on them, and I remember I called Leguizamo and was crying. I was like, you did this for me. And then 5 minutes later, it was just something I had.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like everything since then, anytime I've had any bit of success, it was like things I thought were going to fix me. 5 minutes after they were accomplished, didn't. And ultimately, time and time again, I've had to learn that it's an inside job.
Is it interesting to be somebody working in Hollywood? I'll let you get out of here in a couple minutes, but I got a couple more things for you. Okay, cool.
Yeah, okay.
This is a blast. Is it interesting to be somebody in Hollywood that has a code? For instance, like because you hear, Hollywood, the waters can get murky, and here you are, this honest guy that's kind of living this 12-step way. Have you? What's your experience been like with that?
Well, that was part of the thing that came into this project too. Is like that was the realization that I need to start just surrounding myself with people that I know are good people, because I'd had a lot of experiences with people that weren't, and as a sort of people pleaser, I'd always been into being like, oh, they're gonna like me, of course, everybody does, and then ended up being sort of beaten down, and very upset and bitter by the way that I got treated by people that everybody said, that's a bad person, we should not work with them. And so part of this was like, I'm going to surround myself with friends and do it with people who are good people. And that's been very helpful in this project. I mean, and Jeff, it was an accident, but is a prime example of that, because he's, such a good person, even though he's not sober, has a lot of experience with sobriety and people in his life and stuff like that, and sort of speaks the language as well. And I just celebrated 20 years in October.
Wow.
And Jeff came to my 20-year party, and he brought me a gift. And the next morning, I didn't get to open it until the next morning. It was a copy of his book, because my book had been stolen in Mexico, and a tomato, a block of baker's chocolate, and a bottle of non-alcoholic wine. And I opened it up and I saw that I just like lost it. I started, the tears just came out, and I just thought, wow, what a profound, like, full circle moment that whole thing was.
Oh man, that's amazing. And your ability to have, at that 20 years, what is your sobriety date? So I guess it's October. That was when you were in Vegas, October
28th, 2001. It was right after September 11th.
Okay. So, and when do you meet your wife now, Courtney?
My wife, Courtney, was the speaker at a meeting, a 12-step meeting in 2017.
Okay.
And I went up and talked to her afterwards. It was one of the most uncomfortable, awkward meetings I'd ever had. And same as Jeff, I walked away from it like, nothing's ever going to happen with that, because that was so awkward. And I stalked her on social media. I like to say when she's around that she chased me down like one of those lions on the savannah. We'll take the gazelle is like sipping water by the lake, and the lion comes and jumps and pounces. But the truth is, I sort of stalked her on social media, and then I saw that we had a mutual friend and went through them. And she, being a reporter, had he said it was just like hours of questions before she, agreed to exchange phone numbers. and then when she showed up on our first date, she showed up with a background check. It was like, I remember that first conversation being like, oh my God, I will never be able to lie to this person. Yeah. Which is kind of a relief. It's like, well, that takes that off the table. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm just going to have to be truthful from now on. And yeah, because she's got that reporter spidey sense, and she'll catch me. It's
so funny because it's like we're the worst predictors of the future. At least I am, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm the worst assessor of how something went usually. Oh, it went great or it went terrible. It's like it's either I'm the most important person in the room or the least important.
Totally. Exactly.
It's tough to find that. One thing I want to ask you: the show's kicking ass, but people are talking about it. Like Bob Ryan. In my opinion, the show's not for you, Bob, but whatever. So Bob is, I mean, seriously, you're not the target demo, dude. So whatever. But how are you dealing with some of these people that are being vocal about the criticism? Which to me means it's such a good show. But how are you handling that?
Yeah, it's an abstraction. It's like really not in my day-to-day life. I'm busy working. I have this show and another show. So I'm basically working 2 full-time plus jobs right now. It's been the hardest work period of my life. And so there's fortunately not a lot of time for me to sit down and get spun.
Yeah.
About things that people are saying. I did go through that on Ice Age movies, like reading reviews and wanting to go fly places and yell at people. On this, I just sort of haven't really had the chance. And I lean on, my friends that have recovery and I do, I'm in therapy and stuff like that. So, it hasn't I don't know why it hasn't really spun me out. And the first time it happened was sort of when they asked Magic a question, and he was like, I'm not looking forward to it. I'm like, I'm the kid that, like, my best day of my life was like if my dad drove us up the 405 and I started to see the Forum come into view and realized where we were going. I stood online at Westminster Mall for 2.5 hours to get Magic's autograph when I was 6. It sits on my desk still. And so Magic Johnson, that's my hero. You know what I mean? Like, I'm the kid that would wait outside the Forum for them to come out and get more autographs. And so my first take on it was just like, oh my God, Magic Johnson's talking about it. That's so cool. Like, he knows what we're doing. And so there's that excitement level with it too. And with all these people, so we come at Max and I both, having grown up here, like, come at it from that perspective of these are our heroes, and a lot of love goes into it, and I maybe it takes a few episodes to get to that, or I don't know, but I feel like the thing that I do hear a lot from people is like, you can feel that fan perspective, you can feel that love in it. You
can feel the love for sure, dude.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we did so much research on this and put so much work into it. Like, it definitely takes on that perspective. I hope that this was like, when we walked onto the Forum floor for the first time, it was like not just walking into my childhood, but like walking into my greatest childhood fantasy. And I don't know. I hope that comes across eventually in the way that we deal with all the characters.
Well, I can tell you it has. For at least for me personally and other people that I've talked to, you just talk about the characters. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I got guys who are now, I'm in my mid 40s, so I got buddies who think they invented the, following the NBA, and they're like, can you believe how much this guy is like Magic Johnson? Like, can you believe how they got Kareem? People are like, because a lot of times people, even, I mean, honestly, Jim, when I was reading about it, I was like, how the hell do they get Magic right? How did they get Kareem right? And you got it. You nailed it.
Well, and that's a lot of people passed on the project for that reason. Like, you'll never be able to cast Magic and Kareem. And, we found these two guys. When we saw Quincy the first time, I went online and looked him up.
Quincy Isaiah, that's who plays Magic.
Yeah, he plays Magic. And, we saw him, I was like, that's him. And looked him up online. The only thing that was online when you Googled him was he had played football at Kalamazoo College. He was the center on the football team. And so it was like his highlight reel of like 20 minutes of pancake blocks. Because he was, he was a big dude. And then his IMDb page was blank. I took a picture of his Instagram. It had like 260 followers on it. And so, then Solomon wasn't even like out to be an actor. It just sort of came. He was a professor, happened to play basketball at Cal. And so he embodied a lot of that internal thought, the brilliance, the mind of Kareem. Also happens to be 6'11" and to play basketball at a super high level. So I guess we just lucked out. But, I like to say it's a story about a dynasty, but there's a lot of an underdog story to it too, between, myself coming from cartoons, and Quincy and Solomon, who'd never had a professional acting gig before. And, a lot of people just like Max. I mean, he had been working in the drama world, but like his main credits were like Godzilla and, King Kong, and not necessarily what you would think of. And it's all of us sort of living out our greatest dream project. And I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's like I said, it's a story about a dynasty that's also internally kind of an underdog story too. When you
go to 12-step stuff now, what are you doing on the day-to-day, like to stay To stay vigilant, because you mentioned that at the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like you have to stay vigilant. And I was thinking, I thought about this before, just, you know, writing keeps you humble, but so does sobriety. And it seems like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it really does. And it seems like you don't have much of an ego. What are you doing day to day to maintain and be vigilant?
Well, I think that's part of it. You know, like I go to 12-step meetings. I go to meetings that are, you know, all guys that have a lot of recovery, and like, you know, don't give me a lot of rope to act like a big shot, and also, frankly, a lot of them bigger shots. And then, you know, my wife's sober. I'm, you know, one of the big challenges of this job, because it's been so hard, is like turning the stress off when I get away from the computer, because it's not fair to her to put that on her, you know, or the kids, you know, like I don't, you know, I'm keenly aware of, I don't want to put the stress of my job onto them. They don't deserve that. And I don't want them talking about it in therapy in 10, 15 years either. And so, you know, we have Courtney and I and Cameron, my stepdaughter, we all meditate every night for 20 minutes before Cameron's bedtime. And, you know, I'm more cognizant of ever that, like, I need to stay in the thing, because if I don't, I'll go off the track.
Yeah.
You know? I'll mess this stuff up, and it's a form of insanity where things will just look real to me. Like I will all of a sudden think everybody's out to get me, and I will be, you know, restless, irritable, and discontent, and I'll mess this thing up. And it's too important. Both my family and my marriage and my career, all those things are too important to me right now to let go of the things that have got me there. And, you know, maybe at some point I'll go, screw it, and stop. But it hasn't happened yet. And I haven't, you know, one of the miracles of the work that I do is even in the worst days, I haven't wanted to take a drink. Like, you know, for me, I've been fortunate. Like my worst day of my life was the day that my dog died. You know, he was with me 16 years. You know, the whole first 15 years I was sober, and as sad as I was that day, I checked into it. I was like, if I'm ever going to drink, this is the day to do it. And there was not one iota, a cell in me, nothing, no part of me wanted to do it. And for me, someone who couldn't picture doing anything without a glass in my hand, you know, that's the miracle to me. That, like, there was not a shred of me that wanted a drink, that thought a drink would make it easier or better, or craved it in any way.
All right, last question.
That's yeah.
Go ahead. That's what.
No, that's to me, when I look back at it, that's all the proof that I need that the thing works.
All right, last question. What do you tell somebody? Because a lot of people, or some of the people who listen to this, are people who don't, you know, they don't want to walk into a meeting, or they're just kind of curious. You know, you hear the term sober curious or whatever. What do you tell that person that they can't get a day? You know, they come up to you in one of those stag meetings and they're like, hey man, like, how do I do this? What do you tell them?
Well, I mean, there are two different people: the sober curious and the people that can't get a day. The people that can't get a day, to me, that implies like they want a day, they can't get it. When I work with people, like, I believe that you have to make this your life for some period of time. I know that maybe sounds daunting, but like, I feel like you really have to jump into it with both feet and do everything that they sort of say to do. At least I did. I mean, it didn't work until I did it 100%. And, you know, and then the other thing is, like, all these cliches are really true. Like, to me, you know, when I first heard things like one day at a time or whatever, I was like, oh God, I know the tricks that you're talking about forever. But like, that really changed the way that I looked at the world. Like, I can pretty much do anything for an hour, a minute, a day. And so, you know, that I think is also really important, just to look at it like today, just make it to a meeting tomorrow and take it that way. So those are sort of my two big pieces of advice. Dive in with both feet and really, like, learn the idea of a day at a time.
Dude, I cannot thank you enough for the time. This means a lot to me, dude. You know, it means a lot that you're out there sharing this stuff. So, because again, it goes back to the Superman rides the bus thing. You all of a sudden become this relatable guy, and I think it really helps people.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I look forward to hearing it.
Yeah,
I probably won't because I hate listening to myself, but I do appreciate the opportunity and the time and the platform. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, dude. My brother lives out in Hermosa. He's a therapist out there, and he's sober.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I'm sure his name's Kevin Souza. You probably maybe seen him. He goes to a lot of those stag meetings, so you never know if you come across him.
It sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, he plays a lot of music out there. He's a good dude. So if you bump into him, say hey. All right.
I will, absolutely. I'm the same.
All right. Well, thanks, Jim, man. I'll let you get back to it. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks for making this work.
Yeah, you got it. Later. Thanks so much for listening to The Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media podcast.